Hello and welcome to The Rewind, where we dive into the making and legacy of various films from cult classics to award-winning masterpieces. Today's movie is Highlander, the 1986 fantasy action adventure that stars Christopher Lambert as Connor MacLeod, a Scottish Highlander who discovers he is immortal and, after centuries of clandestine duels, confronts his ultimate rival in modern-day New York to win the fabled prize. Also starring Sean Connery and Clancy Brown, and directed by Russell Mulcahy. Highlander will be a box office disappointment in the US, but strong international box office, not to mention strong VHS sales as well, will lead Highlander to be a cult movie classic that will lead to a franchise of many sequels, TV spin-offs, even an animated series, and a remake is currently being filmed right now starring Henry Cavill. Joining me today to talk about Highlander is journalist Paul Rowlands. You can check out his work at Money into Light, where there's film interviews, essays, and articles, including a really terrific interview with Highlander director Russell Mulcahy they did 10 years ago, which I'll be talking about in this episode as well. Paul, thank you so very much for joining me today.
Oh, you're welcome. Always fun to come on the show.
Highlander. This is for me a pivotal movie for me growing up. So I was born in 81. So a lot of the media I was watching, like even cartoons, movies and such, a lot of sword and sorcery stuff. Cartoons
Right.
wise, you had Masters of the Universe and Thundercats and things like that. Movies wise, Conan the Barbarian, all these kind of movies. And Highlander fit right in there, but it was different compared to the other films because you had this other aspect to it, this fantastical kind of journey through time through this main character, which I just found to be incredibly just fascinating just watching it. And of course, great sword fights, great villains, Sean Connery just there giving that gravitas to it all. And then you have the soundtrack, Queen music in there as well. It's just fantastic. And it's a film that I still love to this day. I mean, right now I'm wearing my There Can Only Be One shirt. And
Oh,
the
wow, that's
reason
very cool.
why I wear it
Yeah,
is because I just absolutely love the film. And, There Can Only Be One, I think one of the best kind of like movie kind of line phrases that's really associated to a movie. Like, Star Wars has a whole thing with the Force, Field of Dreams, if you build it, he will come. There can only be one. That's the one that everyone knows for Highlander. I think it's just a really, really clever piece of writing in that alone. And I absolutely love this movie, and I still do. Every time I watch it, if it's on TV, I'm watching it all the way. It's a fantastic,
yeah.
fantastic film. What about yourself, Paul? Do you remember the first time you came across Highlander?
Well, I actually saw it in the cinema when it came out
Right?
in 1986, and I would have watched it, because it was a new big movie, and especially because Sean Connery was in it. And I would have been probably 14, 15 when I saw it. And I used to, because I'm a tall guy, I used to get into like 18 rated films when I was 14, 15.
Hmm.
So it would have been one of the first films that I watched alone, I think, without my parents and stuff. Yeah. And yeah, I loved it. I remember still to this day, you've got that scene, the sky cam rig in the wrestling scene, which was kind of mind blowing. And then the scene that really just, I think, is an incredible sleight of hand that Russell does in the movie is when they're in the parking lot and they're having the big sword fight. And suddenly the camera goes up, not down as you would think, but up. And then suddenly we're in medieval Scotland or whatever, the 1600s, 1500s. And I just thought, wow, this film's unlike anything I've ever seen. And I just loved it. I was reflecting on this last night. I really like films that just play it straight and, ridiculous concept, but you just play it straight. You don't get clever. You just play it straight and accentuate the humor if it's naturally there. And I think that's what this film does. And the one thing that I'm worried about with the new film is how serious they're going to have a tone, in the new movie. They've got to keep the humor, I think, and the sense of ridiculousness. Because I watched Wuthering Heights yesterday at the cinema, and they're doing all kinds of clever things with the material, but I just can't help but think, well, just play it straight, And I think that's I think they're the kind of films that last, are the ones that just they're their own beast and they just play it straight.
And I think something that's great with Highlander as well, in which is really interesting, is that you have these you have these characters that are immortal. So you think to yourself, if it's a person who can't die, what stakes are there in play? But there are stakes at play. There's so many things going on. There's relationships. There's that don't last time. There's the concept of trying to survive time itself without losing your mind and trying to, you'll have your sanity at the end of it. And then you have the whole concept of, and this is what blew my mind away in this movie, the whole thing about the decapitations. I never saw that in other films before. I think Conan maybe had like one or two
Yeah,
moments in there. But with the whole point of these duels is that has to end with the head of your opponent being taken off his body and then the whole quickening and whoever, stands at the end, gets the ultimate prize of just like, just I just found it to be incredibly fascinating concept there because that's the stake right there. He can't be killed, he's immortal, but on the other
yeah,
hand, if there's another, immortal like him, like the Kurgan is in this movie, played by brilliantly by Clancy Brown, which we'll get to later, it's a fantastic kind of piece of fantastic catch there. In that this man who survived centuries just like that with the swing of a blade can lose his head, and I think having those stakes there is fantastic. It's just a really kind of clever way to get people really invested in the dangers that can come in from this life. Um, I want to talk about just going back all the way. So the concept of the film comes from this bloke named Gregory Wyden, which from this was his first kind of calling card movie. He's done other movies since then. He's actually directed one of my favorite kind of religious horror movies. You ever seen The Prophecy with
yeah. With
Christopher
Christopher
Walken?
Walken, yeah,
Yeah, fantastic movie. That was a Gregory Wyden. He wrote and directed that movie. Um, so when he came up with this material, he was 20 years old. He said, I saw a fantastic interview he did back in 85, 86 with Cinema Fantastique. He's talked about he was hitchhiking across Europe. He was standing at the Tower of London in the world's largest army correction, and then it struck him in that what if he owned all this and actually worn the armor in battle, and then he envisioned himself in battle, and from that came this story about this kind of like this warrior through time, and he actually did it first as a UCLA film project, and then his professor's like, this is pretty good, you should try to get an agent, and sure enough, he did that. He got an agent, and this thing got snapped up straight away. And another interesting thing that I didn't know of as well, I think it was mentioned in the article that you did with Russell. The original title of this movie, do you remember what it was?
yeah. It was when Russell got the script. It was called The Dark Knight.
The Dark Knight, exactly.
Yeah,
Which I think is like would have been a great title as well. But Highlander, I think,
yeah,
just kind of encapsulates everything here. Um, That would be pretty cool though, if you're 20 years old and you come up with this concept while hitchhiking and then you send it to an agent and snaps it up. I think that'll be a really, really cool kind of shot of confidence for like a young film student.
yeah, yeah. Just the long road to production after that.
Yes, sir. So you have producers Peter S. Davis and Bill Panzer. So they are the ones who bought the treatment. So their filmmaking partnership goes all the way back to the 70s. Um, So Davis was an attorney and then he ran a steel company. Panzer did television commercials. The first movie they did together was his film from, I think it was 1976, called The Death Collector. Starred Joe Pesci. Really early
Oh,
kind
I've
of
seen that.
independent Joe Pesci movie.
I've
Yeah.
seen that
Cost like
film. Yeah.
160 grand to make. So that was like their kind of calling card as kind of like, and then
Yeah.
they did
By the
other
way,
movies.
did you
Yeah,
know that
yeah.
Joe Pesci was cast in Raging Bull because of that movie?
Yeah, that's right. Didn't Scorsese and De Niro see it? And they're like, hey,
I
we
think De
should
Niro saw
get
him
in
and
there.
said you need to get this Joe Pesci. He's a real like mafioso guy. I don't know if he's
Yeah.
got connections, whatever. And that began his career. He got an Oscar nomination for Raging Bull. Yeah,
And so they step up this film, and what they said they really liked about it is that it has all these different elements that would appeal to a wide audience. I mean, and that's what's so cool about the movie. It's fantasy, it's a romance film, it's a period film. It has that humor that you talked about before. It has the
Yeah.
action scenes. It has the hero. It has the villain. I mean, it's a perfect kind of package of a movie put together because it appeals to so many people. And I think it's a real kind of clever way to make a movie. In that it seems these days like a lot of films are just kind of like we are like this one thing that's going to appeal to one market only. But a movie like
Yeah.
Highlander, and I think a lot of movies from the 80s especially, they have broad appeal to so many people, which I think is something that's really missing from today's cinema landscape.
That's true. Yeah, I think if Highlander didn't already exist, I doubt that it would be made today because investors would say, "What genre is it? What kind of
Yeah,
film is it?"
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. In Japan, they don't have that problem. A lot of the Japanese movies, genre movies, are multi-genre. In fact, in Japan, I wish they'd just make films with one genre and not mash up everything they do.
So these two screenwriters called Peter Bellwood and Larry Ferguson were brought on to rework on a script because this is a 20-year-old we're talking about who had the script. And Wyden actually said that he wasn't concerned about this. He knew he was young. He knew he was a college kid. It's natural for producers not to naturally trust some of his instincts. However, he would have a gripe, and which we'll talk about later on, in kind of like the creative directions taken from what his script was, which goes back to that Dark Knight title to what Highlander
Yeah,
would become. But they have to find a director. So this is when we come to the Aussie director Russell Mulcahy, who his calling card film was an Australian film called Razorback, which came out in '84. And I think he also did all these kind of music videos as well. Duran Duran, especially, was people he worked for. He did a whole bunch of them. Really cinematic looking stuff. Culture Club, Elton John, Billy Joel, Rod Stewart. He'd like to really just make these cinematic music videos which really stood
yeah.
out in the time of MTV. I mean, we're talking 84, 85, prime
He
MTV
basically
kind of stuff.
created MTV, I think.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
so. Yeah.
Um, so I read in your interview that he did that when he got the script, he just kind of left off the page for him as something that was like visual, like instantly he can just picture all of these kind of scenes. And again, it was different kind of to other fantasy films he said as well, because a lot of the fantasy films I'm coming out was kind of like teen centric kind of stuff, like post Star
Yeah.
Wars. A lot of that stuff
Yeah.
is being made, and this was a film that could really kind of like really appeal to not only that audience but especially adult audiences as well. And then you have kind of like all these period changes as well, which he thought was really cool to work with. What he really liked is like the contradiction between the two things. On one end, you have kind of like the period film settings, they're more open, they're more airy, is the word he said. And then he said when then you transition to what he called the electric 80s. It's very kind of hard, kind of like metropolis,
Yeah.
these kind of environments. Again, the great contradiction between the two. And I think it's something that's really cool in the film. You mentioned before that shot, how you go from the parking lot and it goes up into like the Highlands of Scotland. It's a great contradiction between
Yeah.
both. You have this land of concrete and steel, and then you go to like just like this open air kind of like
Yeah.
battlefield scenario, which I think, yeah, the contradiction between the two again just really works so well in this movie.
Yeah. I remember actually, now we're talking about it, I remember the reviews at the time. And I remember one reviewer said that Highlander was completely incomprehensible.
Hmm.
And they talked about that shot and they said, 1 minute you're in a parking lot and there's people fighting with swords. And then the next minute you're in the Highlands in the 1500s. He said, this film is just crazy. It's completely incomprehensible. And I remember thinking as a 14, 15-year-old, it made sense to me.
Yeah.
You
I
know?
think that's just a really rigid, old school way of looking at film at the time, I think, because it was unconventional for that to happen, but unconventional is something that what a lot of people were craving at the time. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, and again, Pete Davis, the producer, he actually said that they had two choices. They could go with a very kind of conventional director, they could play it safe, or they can go with a young director. unique shooting style, elevate the material, bring a real kind of visual aspect to it. Won't be afraid to like try different things, you know. And I think the commercial directors of the commercial directors and video directors of that day, especially, you know, well, not only Russell Mulcahy, but if you don't go to the commercial world, you have Ridley Scott, who really brought you know, all the stuff that he brought to the fore with Blade Runner and Alien and all that stuff as well. Later on, David Fincher. I think these guys from these backgrounds can bring kind of like unconventional choices to genre film. And so, you know, in a way, I could kind of understand how a film critic can be like, well, this doesn't make sense because this happened and that. But again, that's the whole point of this movie, especially in how they want to make it. It isn't just one thing, it's multiple things, especially in the way the film is shot, it's edited, it's made. And all of those kind of all of those kind of twists and turns to like the visual progress in the film and the way to go about segueing between them. It keeps you on your toes. It keeps you interested.
Yeah,
It's kind of like, wow, you know, I'm going on this journey from back and forth. Because I imagine in Connor McLeod's head, all he's thinking about is all these past kind of things that are going on.
yeah,
And the fact that it doesn't drive him mad, that he's such a stoic kind of character throughout the film, I think is
yeah,
really interesting.
yeah,
Maybe that's something they could have played with, but I imagine he's just too busy preparing for the next battle and not trying to lose his head without trying to
yeah,
lose his head, so to speak.
yeah. And I also like the fact that Con is such a positive person.
Yes.
Like another director would have gone for an approach where he's going mad, you know, he's going crazy, he's got like mental illness because he's trying to deal with all the events and just storing all that in your head, all the emotional traumas and changes in the world that he's seen would send a lot of people mad. But the choice to make him a positive guy who kind of has a flippancy about him, I think was a very interesting approach. Yeah. Another thing that I noticed watching it last night was the way the script is structured is like a
Mm.
novel.
Yeah.
You know, people think it's kind of some people think it's kind of a dumb movie, or they don't like the script, they don't like the dialogue. But the way it's structured is very carefully structured, like a novel. Like it very deliberately goes back in certain times, certain places to further the narrative throughout. It's very clever the way it's structured, I thought.
And the novel aspect is really interesting because I think this film is highly influential in the way a lot of these kind of romantic kind of drama, historical romance drama movies and TV series are made these days. A show like Outlander, for example, which is
Oh
deals
yeah.
with time travel, going back and forth. And I know a bit about this because my wife absolutely loves it. So I'm kind of like a second hand Outlander watcher, you know. So I know all about
Yeah.
all this stuff. So I think a show like that is heavily influenced of what Highlander does in this movie. Not only the Scottish connection between it all and the time travel connection between it all, but also the going back and forth between different time periods in a way that it does is highly influential, I think. And
Yeah.
so when people talk about Highlander and they talk about more of the campier aspects of it, whether it be some of the music or whatever, they overlook the kind of like really innovation that a lot of this movie has. And I think it's to their discredit that they do that because I believe that this movie is highly influential in the way that a lot of films are made and a lot of what people approach story, especially when it comes to the whole different period pieces, kind of like structure of this film. And again, it keeps you on your toes. I mean, I think it's just fantastic where one moment you see Connor McLeod kind of brooding within his kind of like his apartment and he's looking at his always weaponry, which I think is really cool. It's got all these different weaponry from different cultures and
Yeah.
such. No doubt maybe different little side prizes from his different duels over the time. But then it will go back to a time where he's like a Frenchman undertaking a duel, or Englishman undertaking a duel, and
Yeah.
the guy's trying to shoot him, but he can't die, and he's
Yeah.
trying to figure out whether something's wrong with his pistol. It's a very comedic kind of moment, and
Hilarious.
I
The
think it's
Monty
just,
Python theme or something.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Um, the Matt's Movie Reviews YouTube channel is brought to you by TeePublic. TeePublic is the world's largest marketplace for independent creators to sell their work on the highest quality merchandise. With over 1.2 million designs, TeePublic is sure to have something you'll love. So speaking of Connor McLeod, so we had to talk about Christopher Lambert. Um, so now Christopher Lambert's kind of like this legendary figure in genre film. Back here in '86, the two films that he was known for well, number one especially was Greystroke, the Legend of Tarzan, which he plays the title character in the movie. In the other movie, it was Subway by Luc Besson. He did that. Um, so for the role, supposedly Kurt Russell was someone that the producers were really itching for to try to get.
Yeah.
And I read, I think it was in that Cinema Fantastic article that he wanted to do it, but Goldie Hawn actually convinced him not to do it,
Yeah. Yeah.
which I find interesting. But I think it wouldn't work. Kurt Russell's a fantastic
Yeah.
actor, but I think it wouldn't work. And what Russell said, because he's the one that really wanted to have Christopher Lambert, is that, well, first off, he had the look. He said
Yeah.
his eyes was something that was very kind of convincing towards him because in Greystroke he doesn't talk much because he's playing Tarzan, and Tarzan when he goes to America is more grunting and everything else. He
Yeah.
has the look, he has the eyes. There's a certain kind of exotic quality to him. What he didn't know is that he couldn't speak English because
Yeah.
it was a Frenchman. So they had to deal with that. But which was something like I think Russell said that he learn English very fast. He's a very, if you watch any of his interviews, he's a very intelligent like guy and
Yeah.
such. So it
Yeah.
doesn't surprise me that he kind of picked up English for this movie. But I think it's really what works in the casting, especially, is that he is this guy as a man, Christopher Lambert. He's a guy up front coming from a different culture, playing like in a modern day man in New York City, but there's something about him that's kind of alien. And I
Yeah.
think that aspect to it, from the accent, from the way he kind of moves to a lot of other things, that works so well for the character himself. Because if you were immortal and you lived for hundreds of years and you're going through different countries, different cultures, different languages, you would be a mishmash of all of these things by the time you're like in
Exactly. Yeah.
1986 New York. And it worked incredibly
Yeah.
well, I think, because not only did he bring Conor McLeod to life, but Christopher Lambert would end up becoming like a very kind of like pivotal player in genre film from that point
Yeah.
going onwards.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. Thinking about it, I mean, it is bizarre that he's playing a Scotsman. It is bizarre,
Yeah.
but wonderfully bizarre. But you're right. 600 years of all the travels and travails and traumas that he goes through, he would become like an international person, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you think about someone like Pierce Brosnan, who's lived in he was Irish, but has lived in LA since the 80s, and he's practically American now. The way he speaks is transatlantic. You don't look at Pierce Brosnan or hear him and think, "Oh, that guy's Irish,"
Mm.
and that's just a guy who's lived in LA for 40 years.
Right.
Then you think about a guy like the Highlander, who's been all over the world and been through so much and has learned so much that he would become this figure in the movie where people look at him and say, "Who is this guy? Where's he from?" Like, he's like a guy without a nationality in a way. Lots
Um,
of different places.
yes, definitely. Um, The he Lambert said that when he got the script, what really appealed to him wasn't so much the action, but it was kind of like he's playing a role that touches on the subjects of immortality. And like when he's carrying, he says in this interview, I think it was with Hey You Guys during the 30th anniversary, he said that what's it like having a character who has or carries 500 years of violence, pain, love, and suffering, and but he has to walk around and he has to be positive, you know. That's something that amazed him the most, going back to the positivity of the character.
Yeah,
And loyalty as well. That's another thing about him as well. He's very loyal
yeah,
to the people in his life, which he found to be most appealing about it. And it is a great role when you think about it. I mean, 500 to play a character who's 500 years old and has gone through these things. I think it would be just a treat for an actor to do. A lot of preparation he had to do for this role. First off, the English. He had a dialogue coach. So they said that his natural accent worked well enough to play the immortal in modern day New York. He had to work a bit on the Scottish accent, and like when compared to other Scottish accents, it's not the most, high ranking of all of them,
yeah,
but it's passable enough, I guess, for the select themes that he has. But he had to work for around 4 or 5 weeks to get that right, and he had a lot of coaching on set. Horse riding, he said he was okay because he was riding since he was a kid, but the sword training was something he had to really work on. 12 to 16 weeks So he starts with plastic swords, wooden swords, aluminium swords, light steel, and then heavy steel. So you had to get that down pat, which is of course incredibly important. I mean, 500 years of holding, blade, holding steel. You
Yeah,
imagine he'll be
yeah,
incredibly proficient at that. And it comes out really cool in the movie. It's like it's not the best choreographed action scenes, but I think the way that Russell shoots him comes across incredibly epic, and they pull it off. And I think he's really terrific in doing so. When you watch Christopher Lambert play do the whole kind of sword fighting kind of aspect to it, what's your first thoughts when you think of him as a swordsman in this movie? Because to me, I think this is a guy who knows his blade, like the blade's almost kind of like an extension of himself in a sort of way.
yes, yeah,
And I think
yeah,
it's a really interesting kind of prop to have in a movie where you
yeah.
have kind of like a weapon like that with a character like this.
I think that when he uses that sword, it's kind of his link back to Ramirez as well, isn't it? Because Ramirez
Mm,
gave him that sword. So I feel like it's like you say, it's an extension of him. And I thought he was brilliant in the action scenes, you know. My friend told me that there's actually a comic series. It's a prequel to Highlander, and it's called The Search for, I can't remember it, The Search for the Sword or The Way of the Sword.
the way of the sword.
And it's a
Okay.
comic book series where it's where Connor is trying to find the sword that Ramirez gave him, the famous one
Mm,
that he uses in the movies, because he lost it in a battle with the Kurgan in the Napoleonic Wars.
okay.
So that would be an interesting comic to read. I might get that.
Yeah, likewise. It's amazing how many Highlander things there are. So many different spin-offs and such. We'll get to that a little later, though.
Yeah,
First off, you mentioned Ramirez. Juan Sanchez Villalobos Ramirez, or as Sean Connery would say, Juan Sanchez Villalobos Ramirez in the film, which is always
yeah,
funny because I think there are certain actors who have a certain accents which they
yeah,
can't shake when they do their films. But no matter what character they play, and they keep the accent, you
yeah,
believe it because the actor is that charismatic. And
yeah,
Sean Connery is that. He plays a Spaniard in Highlander. He played a Russian in Hunt for Red October. He's trying to
yeah.
play an Irishman in Untouchables, which he will
Untouchables,
do
yeah,
right after this movie. But it's all done with that infamous Sean Connery brogue that he has, but you
yeah,
don't care because he's just such a great actor. 7 days is what they had with him. He got paid $1 million for that 7 days as well. And I think it's an investment. It was worthy of the investment because what I'm reading from here from Christopher Lambert, from Russell, from everyone else, is that even though they had him for 7 days, he put all he could into that 7 days, and he took everything serious, and he was very charitable, and he was very kind of professional, which is kind of the opposite of some other stories you hear about some big name actors who are paid like a ton to appear maybe a few days, and they don't really bring their best effort in. For example, Marlon Brando in Superman is one of
yeah.
those
Apocalypse Now
examples.
as well, yeah, yeah.
So I don't know if you ever seen this, but there was a interview that Christopher Reeve did. I forgot what show it was, a talk
Oh
show,
yeah,
and
I think it was Letterman, maybe.
he was talking about Marlon Brando and how much of a
Yeah,
disappointment he was because he didn't take
yeah,
the craft seriously, which will be, I imagine, a huge disappointment for someone like Christopher Reeve, who no doubt probably looked at Brando. But for
yeah,
all accounts, Christopher Lambert has said that he actually loved working with Sean Connery in
yeah,
this movie. And Russell said the same thing as well. I mean, the first day they met each other, he gave him some tea and cucumber sandwiches, and they talked about the role and things like that.
yeah,
And another interesting thing is that Russell is kind of, and he's very kind of innovative in this approach. He knows he has 7 days in him. So Russell said, and this is from your interview as well, that they had multiple cameras on him, so they can get every bit, every angle of Sean Connery that they could when they had that. And he also said that Sean had great enthusiasm. He was very prepared. He was very energetic. He was very smart. He was great fun to work with. And I think having an actor like that, a superstar, a legend, on what is essentially an independent film,
Yeah.
He has a $16 million budget, which is quite big for an independent film, even in the 80s, but it's essentially is an independent film. To have him set the tone in
Yeah.
during his week there and really give it his all, I think he will be highly influential for everyone around him and would have been a really kind of great kind of
Yeah.
a great bit of camaraderie and a great bit of
Yeah.
energy throughout that movie.
Yeah.
So good on Sean Connery for
Yeah.
doing that in this movie.
Well, there's like three different interesting stories about Connery making the movie. One was that the producers allegedly decided to save money, they wouldn't give breakfast to the extras.
Hmm.
And the AD said, okay, well, if you're going to do that, we'll have a word with Sean. And they said, okay, we'll pay the extras because they knew that Sean was going to be all right. Also, when they were filming Sean's death scene, spoilers, they rehearsed it and everything. But when Clancy Brown came into the scene, he came in flying with the sword and
Yeah.
almost chopped Sean's head off.
Yeah.
And Sean took off his costume and walked off. And then he
Yeah.
called and said, I want to meet him.
Yeah.
And Russell was like, oh my God, we've lost Sean Connery. And they had to, Clancy Brown said, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. And they said, we're going to use a stunt double. So, and then there's the other story of his last day on set, which Russell told me, but he said it in other interviews, that Sean said, you're not going to finish me today. And it's $250,000 or something every day that you use me. And for an hour, well, I do for like an hour, he had Sean Connery do every kind of setup and blah, blah, blah. And then he looked at his watch and with like 10 seconds to go, he said, right, you're wrapped. And Sean said, you didn't need any of that footage, did you? And he said, no, I was just winding you up.
I
So,
got that paragraph right here actually. They had
yeah, yeah.
30 minutes.
Oh, okay.
Russell put three cameras on him with a very neutral background, and he said, "Stand to the side, swing your sword, take your hat off, look angry, scream." They did that, and then Russell said, looked at his watch. He said, "Yep, that's a wrap." To which Sean laughed and then said, "You bastard," and
Yeah, yeah,
then moved on from there, which
yeah,
I
yeah,
think is really, really great. Again, Sean Connery.
yeah,
And not to mention, look, the performance he puts in the film, I think is fantastic. I mean, he's playing
yeah,
this mentor role. Um, and he does what he needs to do. He brings gravitas to the movie in that kind of mentor role to the character of Connor McLeod, taught him the way of the quickening, taught him what it
yeah,
is to be immortal, taught him about why, and also taught him especially why the Kurgan cannot receive, the
yeah,
ultimate prize at the end. Because if he does, like the world is doomed, essentially. In the way that he does it in the film, the first introduction is he's on a horse and he jumps over Connor McLeod and they have a little kind of battle and everything. But yeah, I think it's just fantastic in the film. And it's also, I think it's in one of his scenes that has one of the best lines. It's not from Sean, it's actually from Christopher, which is when Sean Connery's character of Ramirez takes Connor McLeod out on the water. To which Connor McLeod says, "I'm a man, I'm not a fish," which I think is a fantastic
yeah.
kind of little bit of a line there.
Well, thinking
Go
about it, we were
ahead.
talking before about Connor's positivity.
Yep.
Thinking about it now, I think, and we were talking about how Connor deals with his immortality. I think he is able to cope because of Ramirez,
Yeah.
because he meets Ramirez and he sees Ramirez as a guy who's had great tragedies, but he's managed to stay positive. And so
Yeah.
I think that if he'd never met Ramirez, he never would have been able to cope the way he does. So
Yeah.
when he
Absolutely.
dies in the movie, you really feel the loss.
Yeah. Um, Speaking of the Kurgan, Clancy Brown, the legendary Clancy Brown, he's the nemesis in the movie. Um, so there were some problems in regards to Clancy Brown being dissatisfied with what the Kurgan ended up being in the movie compared to what was on in the script. And again, this comes back to what Gregory Wyden will talk about as well, in that his script was much darker, much broodier,
Yeah,
which I think is what the remake is going to do. I think they're going to do
yeah,
that dark, broody thing because remakes tend to do that whenever they take on the 80s
yeah,
property, especially. They don't want to be flash. They don't want to have that kind of stuff. They want to darken it up. They want to be serious. They want to do all that stuff, you
yeah,
know? And that's kind of like what Clancy Brown thought that the Kurgan was going to be, especially the parts where He's in the 80s. He's kind of like this punk rocker kind of guy. Um, the Kurgan, in his estimation, wasn't supposed to be like Freddy Krueger. Like he was coming across more kind of like a horror
Yeah.
movie monster. He was supposed to be more of a kind of like he was saying that he envisioned the character wearing the suit and the bowler hat and be kind of like unassuming. He wouldn't stand out in the way that the Kurgan does in this movie. Now, I love the Kurgan in this film. I like those scenes where he's kind of like
Yeah, me too.
this psycho punk rock kind of guy in the 80s because not only is he incredibly entertaining, but it's also just those like I don't give a fuck attitude towards the character.
Yeah,
He's like, you can't kill me, you can't defeat me. I'm bigger than everyone. I've survived centuries. I don't care what anyone says to me, because I'm just gonna tear him apart. I kind of liked it. It's a shame that Clancy Brown didn't like. I'm sure he enjoys the notoriety of being in that film and everything else, but yeah, it's not what he signed up for eventually. And supposedly he always said to Wyden about how he was asked to compromise all the time in regards to what his vision of the character was on the page as compared to what it is in the
yeah.
film, which is unfortunate. But I think he did a fantastic job in this movie.
Yeah, and it is the way the character is portrayed is an interesting counterpoint to Connor because the Kurgan's a complete nihilist. He
Yes.
believes in nothing. He doesn't have a philosophy. He just lives on his senses and his vices. That's the way he's coped, you know?
I really love the rules and stipulations that this movie has in regards to a lot of things.
Yeah,
One of them, which is one of my favorite scenes in the movie, is in the church in modern day, where the Kurgan
yeah, yeah,
and Connor meet each other, and the aspect about no fighting on holy ground.
yeah,
I think is really fascinating in the film, and something I think I haven't seen a lot of the sequels or the TV show. I've seen
yeah,
bits and pieces of the TV show, like a couple of episodes. It used to be free on air on channel 7 in Australia in the 90s. I've seen the second movie, bits and pieces of the third, but the other ones I haven't. Do you know whether they ever dived into the any religious or spiritual connotations of what's going on here? Because if holy ground is important, um, I wonder why that is in the film. Is it cultural, do you think? Because they both kind of come backgrounds or maybe like Scottish ancestry. The Kurgan, I think, goes way beyond that. Or do you know if there's any sort of like supernatural, spiritual, religious aspect to the whole immortals that we see throughout this world?
Well, I've seen all the movies and I saw a couple of the episodes of the TV series, but I don't remember them going into great detail about the religious aspects of it. Um, but I guess, I mean, was Connor the very first Immortal?
No, I
I
think
guess,
Kurgan. No, Kurgan or Ramirez would be before him, right?
right, of course, yeah, of
Yeah, yeah.
course. Um, yeah, I mean, I guess it's part of a mythology that, well, I think that this rule, I was going to say before that it's very interesting. We live in this age now where people cannot sit down and watch a 2 hour movie or a 3 hour
Hmm.
movie, but they will watch multiple seasons of a TV show and be able to follow different strands and timelines as long as there's specific rules for the story. And I think that's what's interesting with Highlander. And some of these rules, because I was watching Highlander last night, I thought it makes no sense that they can't kill each other in the church.
Yeah.
There doesn't seem to be any religious aspect to this whole thing. But I think as viewers, we welcome, especially in a fragmented epic narrative like this, I think we appreciate where there's certain rules and it enriches the story and kind of like a marker, isn't it? It grounds the fantastical. If you sometimes just have these random rules like okay, can't kill each other on um, on holy ground, and also you can't have children.
Yeah.
Why? Why?
Yeah.
Why can't you have children? Apparently, in a wide individual script, or at least one of the scripts, Connor has 37 kids.
Wow.
So it's interesting, like whenever they updated the script, the original script, the changes they made, why did they do it? Why did they take away his ability to have kids? why did they add the holy ground aspect? It's I don't know, maybe arbitrary, but yeah. But I think if I was writing Highlander, I'd have rules scattered around just to keep
Yeah.
it grounded. Yeah.
The Matt's Movie Reviews podcast is brought to you by Amazon Prime Video. One of the best on-demand streaming services available, Amazon Prime Video features exclusive Amazon originals as well as popular movies and TV shows. Watch Amazon Prime Video anytime, anywhere. I think movies in the 80s especially has always had a collection of rules when it comes to certain movies. Gremlins, for example, had the whole thing, don't
Yeah.
feed it
Yeah.
after midnight and such like that. I really I like that stuff because again it does build a mythology for it.
Yeah.
And maybe it's good that we don't know why those things are.
Yeah.
Maybe it needs to be held a mystery.
Yeah.
Maybe it's something we could just use our own imaginations for and determine for ourselves
Yeah.
why this is the case.
Yeah.
Maybe in some of these other materials like you mentioned before, there's graphic novels, there's books, there's everything else. Maybe they
Mm.
go into there. I'm not sure. I'm sure someone out there will say in the comments where this all comes
Yeah.
from because I have no idea, but I enjoy it. I think
Yeah.
it's fantastic.
Yeah. But
So I mentioned
it's
before. Go
interesting
ahead.
also how a lot of classic films, if you think about it, like look at the posters behind you. Like every classic film has a set of rules to it.
Yeah,
Like you could literally write a book and say what you learn not to do and you
yeah,
should do from every single film.
yeah.
Like Jules, never get out the boat. Oh no,
No,
you need a bigger boat. Apocalypse
you need a bigger
Now,
boat. Yeah.
never go in the jungle. Ghostbusters, I don't know, Pulp
Don't
Fiction,
cross the
Heat.
streams.
Yeah, exactly.
Ghostbusters
Yeah,
don't
Heat.
cross the streams. Yep. Heat, yeah, get ready to walk out and someone in 10 seconds flat when you see the heat around the corner. Yeah.
Yeah, well, a lot of those are
Yeah.
kind of like, well, we need a bigger boat. What does that mean? Don't cross the streams. Makes no sense, but that's the difference I think between literature and cinema as well.
Mm.
Cinema, you like these little things that ground you. Yeah,
So budget of 16 million. They start filming. It's a 70-day shoot. They scheduled. It was started in April 1985. They shot in London. Filming took place in Scotland. They did stuff in Greenwich in Scotland Yard. Where else did they did a whole bunch of different places as well. New York, where they filmed a car chase and the duel atop of the famous Manhattan landmark, the Silver Cup Studios neon sign, which is a fantastic. I mean, talk about
yeah,
80s neon sign. You got them clashing the swords, the sparks, and I
yeah,
absolutely love it. But however, in the shooting in Britain was beset with one of the worst British summers in memory. Freezing rain was the norm in Scotland, unseasonal weather throughout London, which I think again I think suits. I think I really liked that. It was like a kind of like that rainy, kind of misty kind of thing towards it. But then, of course, there was a lot of clashes between some of the people here. Again, Clancy Brown said it was a. He said in a Reddit post back in 2014, it was like one of those Reddit Ask Me Anything session. He said we were all trying to make a good movie, and the producers were trying to make money any way they could. So there were a lot of things we had to work around, do on the cheap because of those producers. I imagine the whole no cast and no crew getting lunch would be one of
yeah.
them.
No food.
And then he said, I wasn't getting paid anything. Sean was getting paid a lot, so you have to decide if you're going to have fun or not. The only thing I could have on that set was fun, and that's what I had. It's not one of my favorite experiences making that movie, although I did have fun of it on it. Again, a little bit, bitterness, I think, from Clancy
Yeah,
Brown's in this, which again I think is a shame because
yeah,
if you look at his filmography, especially, I think if you're going to talk about the films that he's in, which ones will come to mind? Highlander will be up there. Shawshank Redemption
yeah,
probably another
yeah,
one.
yeah.
He's one of those kind of great kind of character actors. I believe did he play Frankenstein in a movie as well? I'm trying to remember if he played
I think
Frankenstein
he
in a
did.
film.
Yeah, TV movie or
Yeah,
something, right? Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
So it's just a shame that he had that kind of experience, but. I guess at the end of the day, he has a classic film under
yeah,
his belt, which I think is fantastic.
yeah,
But again, it goes back to that kind of conflict about what was on the script versus what the producers and filmmaker have
yeah,
in mind for the film. And most of the time you would side with the actors in some of this stuff, from these stories. But I think in this case, what Russell and the producers did with the movie made it a better film because I think if it was just a brooding kind of like action, whatever, um,
Mm.
it takes away so many of these awesome, influential, memorable elements from this movie that makes it what it is,
Yeah,
which is this really innovative, visually stimulating, and also just overall entertaining mid 80s
yeah,
kind of like
yeah,
fantasy action movie.
yeah,
And also, what's really cool, when we were talking before about the fight with the neon sign, so they said, Russell said, I think it was in your interview, that to make the sparks on the sword, that actually rigged the blades to car batteries that sat out of the
yeah.
camera's view. So when they hit, I doubt very much to be doing that these days. That's kind of like the,
No,
the big bad 80s there from
no.
that for this movie. The release for the film, it came out March 3rd, so we're already into the 40th anniversary now of the film.
Yeah,
So it had a budget of 19 million and it only made $13 million worldwide. And most of that, I think, came from the Europe markets because Christopher Lambert was more of a star over there than he was here. But what's remarkable about the film is that not only does it survive as this cult movie, but you got all of these kind of other things that come from it, a huge franchise that comes from it. And I like
yeah,
to just talk a bit about some of these different sequels and such. So
yeah,
I'm just going to go through some of them quickly. You have number two, The Quickening, 1991. That was again Lambert, Mulcahy, and then Connery came back as well. Mulcahy actually said, and I'm pretty sure that was your interview as well, that he found Highlander 2 to be a mistake.
yeah,
In that the first film wasn't written with a franchise in mind, but I guess when you have a movie that resonates so strongly, I imagine VHS sales would have been
yeah,
huge. That producers just wanted to jump on that thing, and that he actually didn't sign off on it. His agent did it for him. So Mulcahy
yeah,
was going like, "Oh, here we go." Um, a lot of people don't really kind of dig the movie as a sequel to Highlander and so on. But there are a lot of people, a lot of proponents for the film as kind of like a standalone movie experience. What about yourself? What did you think of the second movie of Highlander to The Quickening?
Well, as a sequel, the story makes absolutely no sense. The thing for me is that I watch a wide variety of films, and you have all these like Italian crazy spin-off, rip-off movies I watch, and so when I watch Highlander 2, I think of it as like one of those Italian-made rip-offs, like Star Crash compared to Star Wars,
Right.
things like that. I enjoy it on that level. I think as a sequel, it makes no sense. I certainly don't think of it as canon. But I think that Russell's action scenes are quite innovative and experimental and exciting and visually interesting. And I think it's a bold movie. I think it's a very different movie than the original movie. And I just find it terrific fun. Michael Ironside, I mean, arguably, he might even be even better than Clancy in Highlander. His character is just completely insane. And I love the scenes with Lambert and Connery.
Yeah.
I think their chemistry is even better. And I think they have even more screen time together. And Connery's hilarious in the movie. But but yeah, it's a crazy movie. But I still think it's the best live action sequel, which I mean it's not saying much to be honest, but yeah.
So you have that was followed with um, Highlander 3, The Sorcerer. That was with Murray Van Peebles was playing the kind of like a Mongolian kind of like a villainous character in that. You had Endgame in 2000. You had The Source in 2007, which were kind of spin-offs from like the series. So there was a
Yeah.
TV series that came out in 1992, which we talked about before. It starred Adrian Paul as Duncan MacLeod, another immortal from the same clan as Connor. And they would star together later on in one of these movies will be Connor and Duncan. And from what
Yeah.
I remember, spoiler
Yeah, in
alert out there,
Endgame, yeah.
Duncan takes Connor's head. But on top of that, there's an animated series that ran in the mid 90s. There was a web series. There was all these novels and comics and everything else that came from it. I think the biggest thing we're gonna just touch on here though is the remake that's coming out. It's
Yeah.
coming out this year. Chad Stahelski is directing it. So he's the guy behind John Wick and some of the Deadpool stuff as well. He's the director of it. It's got an interesting cast. So I don't know if you know all of the cast, but you have Henry Cavill playing Connor McLeod, which is pretty cool. Russell Crowe is playing
Yeah.
Juan Sanchez Ramirez. Dave Bautista is playing Kurgan, which I think is fantastic.
Yeah.
Like he's an incredibly imposing figure. Karen Gillan is playing Heather McLeod, Connor's first wife. Drew McIntyre in it, which again, he's a WWE wrestler. I don't know if you know him, but he's a huge kind of like hulking
Okay.
Scotsman. Jeremy Irons is in it. Jamon Hansu, Kevin McKidd. So it's got a great kind of like what's called cast behind it. It's got a great director. But why do I feel that, Paul, when it comes to this remake coming up, why do I feel that it's not going to be able to replicate in any way the magic that that first movie
Yeah.
had? Because, and I could just envision it. I bet you the action scenes will be better because this is like a Amazon MGM production. I bet you the it's going to be lots of muscle bound kind of guys, and Henry Cavill's very handsome and all this stuff, and maybe the quality of the filmmaking, not much so, not as much as innovation, but maybe production design and stuff like that would be much bigger and epic. But I just don't think it's going to capture the broad appeal that that first movie had. And as we said before, the humor, the romance,
Yeah.
the tragedy, and
Yeah.
also just kind of like the odd elements of the casting, which were just worked so well. It's like the mix, this eclectic mix of characters, eclectic mix of cast, and also just the sense that what you're watching is something incredibly epic to the point
Yeah.
where while it didn't make the money at the box office, there was enough word of mouth going around that people were watching something different
Yeah.
and innovative. And I just don't know whether, and I can be wrong and be happy to admit
Yeah.
that I am. I just don't think that this one coming up now is going to match that.
Well, I mean, on one level, it just can't compete because Highlander's like lightning in a bottle. You've got Christopher
Yeah.
Lambert, who should not have worked as well as he did in the movie.
No.
Just great casting with those eyes. He's nearsighted, isn't he? So
Yeah.
he looks like he's looking off into the distance. And he's got this old soul that Russell, I think, said in my interview. And Sean Connery, who is just, he'd never really done a film like that before, like had a role like that before. Maybe Time Bandits, actually. He did roll out in Time Bandits. And you've got the great Queen score. You've got the
Yes, we
whole
have to talk about
80s
Queen. Yeah. Yeah.
and the Michael Kamen stuff, the great orchestrations of the songs. But also the film's got this real soul to it. Like when my father died decades ago, the song that came to mind for me was Who Wants to Live Forever?
Yeah.
It's just such a beautiful moment when Heather dies. So they've got to get that soul that Highlander has that people don't talk about. But they've also got to have the lightness on the feet is what I'm worried about. Like I said before, Highlander is light on its feet, and that's its charm.
Yeah.
So yeah. But there's a lot of positives for this because I love the John Wick saga. And I
Yeah.
love how they built on the mythology each time and the way they made it all fun. I mean, the John Wick films are fun. The action is absolutely amazing in the John Wick movies. So if they transplant that to swordplay, that could like change cinema forever.
Good.
So, and Cavill and Russell Crowe have a good chemistry because they've already in Superman together. You know, do you know the story about Cavill and Crowe?
Yeah, so Cavill went to slow boarding
Yeah,
school,
yeah,
and
yeah.
Crow was there for what was that movie he did with Meg Ryan?
Oh,
Oh,
Proof of Life.
Proof of Life. He was filming Proof of Life there,
Yeah.
and there was a rugby game, and he noticed Henry Cavill, and they had a talk, and Cavill said he wanted to be an actor, and so Russell Crowe later sent him a package with like a letter. And the letter, which Crow would reveal years later, actually said, if you want to be an actor, the work is shit, but the pay's really good. And
Yeah,
so,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
and ever since then, I think they've been really good friends, and kind of like this kind of a mentor-mentee kind of thing
yeah,
between them two, which will be great as well. I think what's really the coup, I think, in this movie is that what was really great about the Conor McLeod Kurgan thing is that Conor McLeod just looks like a regular guy. It
yeah,
wasn't the 80s heroes at the time was like, your Stallones and Schwarzeneggers and such, like a really kind of big muscly guys, and Conor McLeod wasn't just a regular bloke. And the Kurgan was this huge, kind of giant, intimidating guy. And so when they cast Henry Cavill, I was like, who are they going to get to play the Kurgan? Because Henry Cavill is an impressive physical specimen. He really is. Like
yeah,
he just, like everything, like he's just like bulky and handsome. It's like who are they going to get that? And so when they cast Dave Bautista, I thought that was fantastic because Bautista,
yeah,
even though lately he has got rid of some of the mass that he had in regards to his muscle mass. He's got a more trim. Even a trim Dave Bautista will make
yeah,
Henry Cavill look like a little man,
yeah,
which I think is like actually great casting. What I hope they keep in the original in this remake more than anything else is it's something I really love about 80s films, especially Highlander in the modern day time, is the neon aspect of it, the color
right.
but that
Yeah,
Russell, I think, is really great in capturing the
yeah,
blues and the purples and all that kind of stuff.
yeah,
Especially because when you think of the big neon sign in the end of the fight, I think that kind of that type of metropolis is really great. That like they Harry captured it,
yeah,
and I
yeah,
think Denis Villeneuve did that with Blade Runner 24 like was it Blade
yeah.
Runner 2049 whatever it
2049, yeah,
was. He did that. He matched that kind of aesthetic that the original had. And I hope that Chad does that here because there is that aspect in John Wick. There's the neon aspect of it, the different fight scenes
yeah,
and such. He's in metropolises, and so I do hope they capture that. What they won't capture, though, is having this great pop culture tie-in on having the biggest rock band in the world, Queen, make the
yeah,
music for the film.
yeah,
And that's something that we have to end when we talk about this movie. You mentioned before, Who Wants to Live Forever? One of several songs that was
yeah,
written for the film, not for a soundtrack. The songs actually came out in an album called A Kind of Magic that came out in 1986.
yeah,
That's where the songs were found. But there's so many great, like Princes of the Universe. Whenever that song comes on, I stand still and I just do the Highlander pose. I'm getting the
yeah,
quickening. That's a song with a quickening just coming from in your
yeah,
in your body. Brian May actually said that he really took to the movie. He really loved it. He said that it's a violent tale of immortals fighting to the death, but there's a subplot. It's a tragic love story. The hero cannot die, but he falls in love with people who can. He falls in love with this girl in the Highlands. She grows old, and he has to say goodbye to her. It's a strange kind of tragedy, and I think it's a really kind of really cool way that he can tap into what this movie's about.
yeah,
It's kind of like the tragedy of Conor McLeod in a
yeah,
lot of ways. He has to fight to survive,
yeah,
so he doesn't die. But when doing so, everyone else that he loves in his world has passed on from him. Which I
yeah,
think and then so when that Who Wants to Live Forever kind of comes on, it hits you in those feelings, right? Because that's the song of his life in many ways.
yeah,
I don't know how this new movie is going to try to match that. And I remember hearing an interview with Chad Stahelski. He said that they're not looking to do that. They're not looking to do the Queen thing. That was for the 80s. That was for that time. But Highlander again, why it's so influential is that it's this pop culture monolith. Not only do you have the performances and the story and the filmmaking, but the music that Queen brings to him, it taps into another part of pop culture, and it all
yeah,
comes together in this one package.
yeah,
And the 80s especially did that really well. I mean, when
yeah,
you think of certain movies or certain bands or songs that come with it, Top Gun, Footloose, Dirty Dancing, what have you. But not many kind of action films did that. Maybe
yeah,
except for the Rocky series, I think did it pretty well. But I think
yeah,
Highlander is heads and shoulders above everyone else and how they can get that all these
yeah,
different elements together. And that those Queen songs and like, of course Michael Kamen's stuff as well, I think is
Well, his
So fantastic.
orchestrations of the songs were amazing too.
Yeah, it's
You know,
true.
you know. Yeah, I mean, also, I think that back in the day, you had people like John Barry and John Williams and James Horner who would do these amazingly melodic scores. It's a bit of a sidebar, but when I was back home in England at Christmas, I was watching a lot of movies with my brother and his kids,
Hmm.
and we were watching Moonraker. And my little niece, who's like 11, she said, "I like the music."
Yeah.
And I thought that's so interesting. That an 11-year-old kid is getting into John Barry, and my brother was like, "Oh, I love the music where he's flying into space." And I was like, "I never knew that you liked the John Barry music. I thought that was just me." And I think it's the symphonic music in Highlander plus the rock music, it gives the movie its soul. And I think that we're missing these big scores of the old movies that we don't get that anymore. I mean, there's so many classic films that I've seen over the past 10 years. Well, I couldn't tell you anything about the scores. I mean, One Battle After Another had an amazing score,
Yeah.
the DiCaprio movie, but I can't remember
Johnny,
any other classic films.
Johnny,
Johnny
that's
Greenwood, yeah.
Johnny, yeah, from Radiohead, right? I think when
Yeah,
people think of modern day scores, the name that comes up quite a bit is someone like a Hans Zimmer. But his score is like the kind of like it's like this ominous kind of rumbling kind of thing. Especially because of Chris
yeah,
Nolan films, I think he's kind of like the epic film of our time, and Villeneuve as well, who also uses Hans Zimmer. So that's kind of like
yeah,
those are the kind of scores that come up, that kind of like that ominous dark tones kind of stuff.
yeah,
There's no, and I love his stuff, but what's missing a lot of time. Can you name me a memorable melody that has come from a movie in the last 20 years? If I whistle the Superman score or the Star Wars score or I sing
yeah,
something from Highlander, you know the movie that it came from
yeah,
straight away. I can't think of a
yeah.
memorable melody that has come
What?
from a song,
Yeah,
a movie from the last 20 years because scores, I just doesn't feel like it
yeah,
works that way anymore. It's more about the not it doesn't feel more like music composition than it feels kind of more like um they're trying to make energy out of music, which I could kind of understand,
yeah.
but the melody in the texture from it seems to be missing from more than ever.
Well, Hans Zimmer's interested because he's almost like anti-melody. Like he's
Yeah.
very minimalistic, isn't he? I really
Yes.
like his score for The Man of Steel. The Man of
Right.
Steel is basically da-da, da-da, da-da,
Right.
da-da, and it's incredibly effective. But it's very different to John Williams and John Barry, who
Yeah.
you would just be like, how did they come up with that melody? I mean, there's a story of John Barry, right, who wrote the score for Star Crash without seeing the movie. And the director, they said to the director, "Well, how could, why didn't you show him the movie?" And he said, "Well, if he saw the movie, we thought he might not want to do the score." But John Barry was able to just create scores for movies they hadn't even seen,
Right.
you know. But yeah, that's the way we're now. And what's the other Gladiator? I think is an amazing score. That
Yes.
music theme for Gladiator just makes me weep like a baby,
Yeah.
And I
But that was
missed
like,
Hans Zimmer,
yeah.
Gladiator
But that was
too.
tw that was 26 years ago. So
Yeah,
that's what I'm saying. Like
yeah,
that's it almost seems like that era of score building in movies is kind of out of the way. I mean, not to say that it isn't great. I'm for sure a lot of people tell me a lot of great scores have come out, but I'm just saying that certain type of score that seems to be
yeah.
missing. But yeah, look, I absolutely love what Queen done in this movie, and we don't know what's going to be of this new Highlander movie, but I can say to everyone out there right now is that if you haven't seen the 1986 Highlander, number one, what rock are you living under? Number two, get on it right now and watch this
Yeah,
movie. 40 years since it's
yeah,
come out, I think thematically, visually, so many things. It still stands as a great movie, a great
yeah,
genre film. It really does. And I had a blast, Paul, talk to you
yeah,
about Highlander today because I know you and I have been, talking about doing this for a while, and so we could do it
yeah.
today is awesome. Thank you for your time today and your interview again with Russell that you did 10 years ago. It's fantastic. For everyone out there listening, I'm going to have in the show notes a link to Paul's interview. Make sure you all check out Money into Lights because it's got great film analysis and interviews in there as well. And Paul, I thank you again for joining me. It's always a pleasure to have you on the Rewind.
Oh, you're welcome. I had a blast again. Thank you very much.
Thank you for watching the Matt's Movie Reviews channel. Please subscribe for more reviews, podcast interviews, and exclusive content.